Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to this month's Heritage Art session Searching for Seeding Flowers. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our speaker for the evening, Nishant Saldanha. Nishant is an artist who uses drawing, photography, and writing as the core practices in his work. He studied art and design at Central St. Martin's, London, before moving to California Institute of the Arts, Los Angeles, where he majored in filmmaking. After working in the animation industry and being part of the independent comics community in America, he moved back to Goa to pursue an independent art practice. His best known work, Mr. Good Guy, is an award winning character driven comic with an experimental approach to form and visual storytelling. In Goa, Nishant also coordinates the Amche Mollem Citizens Campaign. Nishant recently contributed to the branding project of the newly reopened Museum of Christian Art as a researcher and visual collaborator. We're so excited to have you here with us today, Nishant. And before I hand over to you, I would like to request everyone in the audience to please keep your videos turned off and have yourselves on mute during the course of the presentation. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and I would like to request everyone to please drop your questions in the chat box, or alternatively, you can raise your hands using the button at the bottom of your screen and unmute yourself when you hear your name being called. Over to you, Nishant.
Uh, Thanks so much, Gunjan. I just wanted to say it's really nice to see many people here, a lot of people who are interested in history, friends and colleagues. And thank you very much for keeping your Saturday afternoon free to listen to this talk, very generously hosted by MoCA. And I'm going to just start sharing my screen, and I'll basically have a number of slides that I will talk over as we tell you the story of the branding project for MoCA from the point of view of designing the logo. And I'm just checking if the screen is visible to everyone. I'm going to make it full screen.
It is visible, yes.
Okay. Okay. So it's actually been a number of years since the Museum of Christian Art relaunched. It felt like there was a soft opening, then a proper opening, and the pandemic stalls that were created and that set the process into a kind of staggered way. But it was very interesting to prepare for this talk because it felt like I had to go back maybe 7 years or so when I had first moved to Goa, because that's really when this project began for me. And as you see over here, the opening slide is the museum's logo that I think by now has become quite familiar. And I hope that it does what logos do, which is that they sit around in the background, but when you are like supposed to recall an institution or recall the logo, you are able to recall the institution and vice versa. And it was a really interesting project, and I think we are having a half an hour or 1 hour discussion on it because something as simple as making a logo kind of entered into a game or a kind of journey for us of several months, and it opened the doors to all the possibilities that the museum itself was looking at. And there was almost like a great adventure that happened in between the process of being commissioned to do this work and the final product. And so that is a story that I would like to share today, as well as all the insights that came up during that process. I think she's actually just joined the call, but I don't think I'd be able to start this presentation or even be here today if it wasn't for Aarti Abraham, who was the project lead on this. And Aarti Abraham is a designer, a typographer, a brand strategist. And she had been living in Goa and engaging with MoCA during its process of refurbishment. And so MoCA approached her, and having worked with to take on the project of thinking up of a brand or an identity for the new museum that would uh, in many ways take it out of the several decades that it had been in, take it out of the position that it was and open it up and create new avenues for it. And of course, this coincided with the museum objects undergoing a lot of conservation, a refurbishment of the church, and the whole new museum space. So I had worked with Aarti a couple of times before, and I had also just moved back to Goa and was in this process of trying to understand Goa for myself, my roots in the state, the history, the colonial encounter, my own family's history. All of this was very interesting to me. And knowing that I was in this process, I think Aarti approached me to work alongside with her. So when I had first moved back to Goa in about 2018, I had come back from America and working in an industry job there, which was very rigorous and very specific. And I'd come back to India specifically to branch out a bit, to give myself some space to breathe and to think about what it is that I really want to do as a career in the arts. And I felt like there was so much that I didn't understand about myself. And that was really the work that was occupying me. And I think the extreme rigor of American life had given way to what Goa really allows you to do is to just stop and think. And you're able to kind of move time along uh, in a way that suits you and suits your interests in this, in your practice, in your life, in anything that you want to do. And so I remember the first 3 years just looking kind of like this. I just spent time very generously. I gave myself a lot of time to go to different villages and to be immersed in things that were calling my attention. A lot of the times in the monsoon, you'd see the feasts and festivals that happen in Goa that I think I tried to attend as many as I could, especially in North Goa. And it was a world that I absolutely was not expecting or anticipating at all, that looked kind of like this. And I think for the first 3 years, it felt like I was in some kind of a medieval dream where this was what this was what I was encountering if you I just chose to look in a particular way. Um, it was really hard and bizarre to think that all of this exists, parallelly to the 21st century, and that these worlds just you can kind of like slip in and out of them. And I kind of knew that there was something that was interesting that was calling me to pay even closer attention. So I think when I came onto the project, Aarti had asked me to be a researcher and to maybe validate all the choices that we made in the brand from the lens of Goan aesthetics, Goan context, and the history of this state and the West, the Konkan coast. So I wanted to get right into the talking about the logo, because we will use this as our central idea and then move in and out and think about everything that connects to it. This was the logo of the museum when the project had just begun. It's a beautiful monstrance, a photograph of a monstrance. And for those of you who don't know what a monstrance is, it's almost like a holding vessel for the symbolic host, which is the wafer that is used to depict the body of Christ. And it's one of the most important objects in a church, kept very centrally on the altar in a tabernacle, and is one of the highlight objects of the Museum of Christian Art. You see over here, what is interesting is that it's a Western Eucharistic object which shows traces of Eastern influences. There are bells over there. There are angels, if you look really close, that actually I have noticed hark back to Mesopotamian and Persian aesthetics. And of course, what you see over here in terms of typography is black letter, which is the lettering that was used in medieval manuscripts, what we think of today as calligraphy. That is the reference over here. And I think like any design project starts, you just start, and we kind of thought, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that we're seeing that it interests us when we're driving around? And Aarti was very interested in the pedestal crosses and wayside shrines that you see in Goa. And so these were like the first references before we got into the project, and you can see these little shape languages beginning to come and actually start to inform the process. Over here, we looked at, there's looking at tiles, and once you notice the interesting shapes of wayside crosses, the references to different histories of architecture, you then start to apply that to other things that you see. And here is a referencing of the facade of churches. Now, if you look at the front of the facade, it looks like two towers and a central portion, but you can really just complete it actually and see the whole rectangle that sits over there. And this idea that there is a simple square or a rectangle that we are faced with, and that has been cut out to give you the shape of a church. Of course, there are squares and rectangles everywhere in aesthetics of architecture, and you'll see it on the tiles, you'll see it on the ceiling, on the paneling. And so these are early references to that. I think the most interesting, rather, problem that we had to solve, or the exciting challenge, was that we had an incredible museum space. And I think any of y'all who have been to MoCA, you really know, like, it's a really beautiful museum, 21st century quality museum with state of the art vitrines, lighting, incredible restoration done on the objects. But what we noticed is that the one thing that is missing from the museum itself, because that is its function, is the context of the very real world in which all of these objects are used. And to take it further, I would always say that the landscape as well is incredibly important for context, to understand anything. And so it was about thinking about the beauty of these objects and everything that they contain in them in terms of information and aesthetics and design, and connecting it outwards to this world of Goa, and very much lived experiences of people and real people. It's a world populated by uh, the faithful. These are not ancient religions that are not in practice, and so it was important for us to think about that and honor that in the understanding of the objects in the museum. I think accompanying us on this very much real, very much real and immersive experience of visiting churches on feast days, going to churches when they were empty and looking really closely at architecture, and doing the same actually for temples and their equivalent of feasts, which is known as jatras or various pujas, was these three books that really became very important references. They're sitting on my table right now, and actually, I remember when we first started working on the brand for maybe the first year, the first 6 months, they were always in my peripheral vision, and I was able to check things in them. Baroque Goa or Baroque India by Jose Pereira is one of the scholars of the Baroque who wrote a very large book, breaking down Baroque aesthetics in India, was very important to help me understand uh, the Western concepts of architecture, as well as the ideas of uh, Indian architectural thinking, what we call cosmic geometry or sacred geometry, and how the priests and the designers and architects who built these churches brought them together in a way to make sure that the buildings over here work within the template of the colonial structure, but are also relatable, or also have in them ideas that belong to this landscape and to the people who have obviously inhabited it for centuries. And I would say even more important and a really essential book is Whitewash Red Stone by Paulo Varela Gomes. And it's a book that's been very informative to me in understanding the agency, the local agency within the framework of Western colonization that brings out the aesthetics that we have today. And it talks very much about the Goanness of churches and the Goan aesthetics, and all of these being these decisions not just being a simple cut and paste, but a kind of negotiation between political, social, and religious ideas, not only of the Portuguese, but also of the Goans who lived here, and how they translate into the visuals of church architecture. So coming back to the MoCA logo, and with all of this in our head, I think it was a very overwhelming but very rich starting point. It took a lot of time to piece together and then ultimately actually simplify and bring down into what you see today. And I think I'll go back to a very important characteristic of the logo is this black square. The black square actually makes it quite a stubborn object to deal with, because usually when you look at logos, there's just a line of them put down, and you'll see MoCA and you'll see the Met and you'll see all of these very beautifully designed typographical logos. But the MoCA logo comes with a big black square behind it that makes it look a bit awkward. But it remained for several reasons, and I'd like to like you to maybe imagine what we were talking about, the facade of the church being superimposed onto it. And really, what is being referenced here is something that's very important and quite vital in Western aesthetics, the aesthetics of Europe at the time, and that was shown in all of the arts, which was the golden ratio or the golden proportions, what people call the ideal proportions. And it's based on the pattern that is seen very commonly in nature everywhere. Here's the most famous drawing describing it by Leonardo da Vinci that breaks up the human body into these proportions, um, which actually tells you at the end of the day that what this really means is that these are ideas of structure in art that actually relate to the human body. And so when your body engages with the facade of the church, it feels natural to look at. It doesn't feel alien because somewhere within you, you have the same geometry. And what is really interesting about that is that there are many things. The idea of the golden ratio translates not only to architecture but to art. You'll find many examples of great masterpieces broken down to show you how they work within the golden proportion. And over here is the same thing being applied to the margin spaces of early medieval books. And it's, I think, really important as we go ahead to start to think about architecture, the human body, and books and the written word. I feel like there is a kind of humanness to all these three things that have naturally occurred in the progression or the development of these arts that connect to the geometry of the body. And speaking of the written word, here is a very incredible piece owned by MoCA. It's a Bible known as the Leuven Bible, translated, I think, in 6 languages and fully illustrated. Um, and another important thing, as you noticed in the MoCA logo over here, is the typeface itself. And so it really comes out of the idea of the Bible itself, which is a very important, of course, tool, a propagation of the religious ideas and doctrines, and also in some ways the great disruption that takes place in Asia when the West comes here and starts to set up its businesses and its agenda. I'm not referring to the Bible as a disruption, but actually the written word itself. Um, when you open the Bible, you see this incredible typeface known as it's a Latinate font. I'm not sure what this exact typeface is, but it is also a font that is incredibly symbolic of the written word from the Roman and Latin times. It goes back to a history. This typeface itself goes back to a history a Roman history. Here is Trajan's victory pillar. It's a pillar in Rome, and if you look up Trajan, you'll find that it's a very, very important typeface that we are surrounded by. It's used in movies today. Like if you think of the Titanic logo or Game of Thrones, what you're looking at is Trajan. And the pillar itself has an incredible history. It has many features that are fascinating. But what we would like to focus on actually is the base of the pillar, where there is this inscription. And it's likely that the inscription was made with a chisel. And this is an example of material itself affecting how words are designed. And I think, as Aarti says, one really interesting thing she says is that typography is what language looks like. And language is really a very important thing to consider when we look at visual aesthetics as well. What is the script? What is the language in which people thought and dreamt when they were making what they were making? Um, and over here, if you look at the stone that was being carved into, there must have been some aspect of the chisel being anchored to the bottom, which gives you the little foot of the T, or the feet of the letters. And here you see what is known as a serif. And I'd also like to think about how we did talk about typography having feet and heads and horns and noses and all of these things, which again connect to living creatures and organisms. And so this was a really important feature of the MoCA logo, simply because it harks back to the word itself. And over here, I have pictures of the Santa Monica Church, and would also like you to see how architecture as well seems to connect in some way back to words. If you look at the if you look at the typefaces over here, it's a very important concept in design. It's something that is made out of straight lines and curves. And if you look at buildings, you'll find the same thing repeating itself. If you look at the human body, you will also find the same thing. Um, we talk about buttresses feeling like ribs, or the inside of a building feeling like the inside of a mouth. Sometimes there's a lot of connections between the idea of the human womb and architecture. And here is an inscription again. Not only the Bible, but the same stone carving you can see is a very important feature of Old Goa. And here is an inscription from the Tower of St. Augustine. So this is basically how we get these four letters, and they are stacked upon each other in order to kind of talk about in order to kind of connect to the idea of architecture as well, structuring. um, the typeface is Arno Pro. I found this image online and I like that it says affirming, because in many ways that is uh, quite what the typeface is. It's affirming, but it is also graceful and elegant. And it's also quiet, but it is very assured of itself. These are very important decisions that are, and very deliberate decisions that are taken by graphic designers, typographers, anyone working in the visual arts in order to create a narrative or an identity for an institution, or it could be for anything. So what's left is actually this, how we got from here to here, um, which is the recognizable logo of MoCA. Um, so I have a small slide that came up in our research. If you look at these are logos from museums in America and Europe, and if you look at them, they're largely typographical, and in some sense, like, they're missing the image itself. And I think this is also a 21st century phenomenon, which you see in the West, where many institutions which used to have little logos, insignias, and symbols, little coats of arms, have done away with that and uh, moved to moved into typographical logos. And you look at the logos of museums in India, there is an image and there is typography, and they're not necessarily embedded one within the other. They are right next to each other. Um, and this was something we felt like we noticed in our research, and we felt we needed to think about how will we combine the two, or how will we bring the two together, the image and the word, to talk about to talk about the museum. I wanted to bring this up as a slight aside. The Met Museum used to have this logo, and it has moved into this. And you can see it's doing away with the aspects of it that make it closer to an image or to a drawing, and moving right towards and just having nothing but text. So when we started going back to the churches, going back to festivals, we started to notice again a proliferation of design and design ideas and motifs. And then we started to collect data in this way. So here we have scallops, which you will find all over from the north to the south of Goa, appearing in different forms. Here are some Western references. Of course, they connect to important symbology within Christianity as well. And we also started to notice that the furniture too was heavily decorated. And again, just like scallops, there is references to nature and animals and plants and flora and fauna. Here is a contador or a chest of drawers in the sacristy of St. Lawrence in Sinkeri. And it's one of the most incredible pieces of furniture that I've seen, kind of just sitting there. And every panel has a different scene that also connects back to medieval aesthetics, to illuminated manuscripts, but it has been translated into wood. And in that translation, of course, the material to responds to the artist's hand. And then we're really coming into what we started to see inside of the churches. And this is a small section of a interior arch in Santana di Talauli. And you see that it's just covered in flowers, and it's almost like the ceiling is dropping flowers onto the people as they sit below. And there is a whole world above, and it's not the sky, but it is just foliage. Um, this is what Santana di Talauli looks like on the inside. And really, what this tells us, and what the scallops say, and also that cupboard from the St. Lawrence Chapel, we started to notice that there were clinging to the architectural shapes were these very beautiful designs. And the thing that they had in common was that they always seemed to connect back to nature. And even if they were inside, it was like almost like an attempt to bring the world outside into the church. And we started to notice this in Santana di Talauli. It was a very important ball dropping moment for us, because just because of the sheer beauty of the ceiling, of the pillars, of the carvings. Also in the Piedad Church in Divar, and also in the Holy Spirit Church in Margao, which has really incredible stucco relief patterns on the ceiling as well. And of course, these three churches are known for their high Baroque Rococo aesthetics as well. They're very well known. Um, Here is Santana di Talauli. And so it started to feel like this is where we need to look. Flowers was common and was important. Um, Here is Holy Spirit Margao. Some more over here. And very interestingly, here is the ceiling of the Morjai temple. And here is, I guess it's Kavi art. I'm not sure how new or how old it is. Maybe Heta Pandit would be able to tell us in the question and answer section. But it's very interesting over here to see uh, what we call aesthetics of the Rococo, which are these flowers, again, Western ideas imported into Goa on a temple. And this is really where I would like to talk about uh, this idea of the East and West encounter that we always talk about in Goa. And I find that it's sometimes quite simplistic and quite simplified. I think the West had several East encounters, perhaps even before it came to Goa, and the East had several West encounters. And there have been many times in which aesthetics have fed into each other. And the other thing that was truly remarkable about this is how it reminded us of what we see in almost every temple if you go around here, which are the ceiling flowers. So it's really interesting to think about what came first, why did it happen, how did Rococo get its ideas, and where did Rococo get its ideas from? Did it get its ideas from temples from India that were far more ancient? And then is the Morjai temple here borrowing back what it sees in the churches of Goa, especially with the squares and the circles working together? It's, I don't know if it's even something that's easy enough to find out about, And but what was really interesting, that was very, very hard to find any information and substantial academic work on decorative elements of churches. If you read all of Jose Pereira, there'll be maybe like 2 lines or 3 lines that talk about decoration of floral elements, for example. He does call it floriferous, and he talks about that as being one of the influences or one of the important roles of churches. And I was actually talking to Johan a few days ago, and he told me about this book. Johan, who works at MoCA, and he told me about this book called How to Look at Churches by Dennis McNamara, who talks about why are there floral and vegetative iconography inside of churches, and it's this idea of alluding to the Garden of Eden and to paradise. And I was thinking about that, and it's quite interesting, and it kind of makes sense in some way that, uh, like, as people, we really cannot remove ourselves from nature, because deep down we understand that we are part of it. I think the three Abrahamic religions, they almost begin with the history of man starting with a dissociation from paradise, and with a promise of its return. And so perhaps it's that yearning for paradise that makes us recreate it all around. However, in Asian philosophies, it seems that that dichotomy is not so clear. It's almost that nature and paradise is not good or evil, or to be banished from or not to be banished from. And it's almost like man is just strung along and is at the whims and mercies of larger cosmological shifts and changes. And I think what is really interesting is that it seems that the architects of these churches might have found a very beautiful opportunity to bring those two thoughts together, and decorate the insides of their churches. Um, Flowers again, and this is from very ancient Buddhist architecture. This is the Bharut Stupa, which I think you can find in Calcutta in a museum. And here we have the symbology of the lotus. If you look really closely at another piece from the stupa, you see this beautiful lotus pattern, um, with petals, these pointed petals, and a lotus stem moving in an infinity loop. I think the lotus flower is incredibly important and central to all Indian religions, Hinduism, of course, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism as well. And again, it connects to the idea of purity, it connects to the idea, and bridging the roots with the idea of the beautiful flower in temples around, some contemporary, some old. And going back again to the late Baroque and the Rococo churches of Europe, where you see the flowers on the ceiling again. I think on some level, we're going back to the idea of nature worship, or at least acknowledging the importance of nature in the life of man. Also, just the beauty of nature. I think on some level, people like flowers just simply because they are beautiful. And whatever the ideology is, there's another layer on top that brings in the philosophy that nature is very central to everything that we do. This is a church on the left, in Italy, in Mantua. It's Saint Andreas, and on the right is Saint Louis, a basilica in France. And of course, over here on the top is what in the West is called a ceiling medallion. And today they're made very commonly. It's a Rococo design, but you'd even find them made out of plaster of Paris, and you can probably buy them even in your markets and put them. You'll find people attaching them to the ceiling of their homes, to fans and to light fixtures, etc. Yes, and as Heta also says, flat floral motifs represent infinity and continuity. I'd like to point out that over here, the stem of the lotus is wrapped around in an infinity sign. I think that was a really beautiful touch. And so here is the ceiling of St. Cajetan in Old Goa, where the same idea comes through. And also, it's a beautiful example of the idea of divine light that architects built into the churches, that the light itself was God. And I remember reading something somewhere about the idea of allowing light to come in, and the light touching the ceilings, the walls, and the parts of the church on the inside is almost like the stimulant for the plants and flowers to grow. And I think that's a very beautiful uh, uh, thought. So wrapping up our hunt for ceiling flowers, which was very exciting and very interesting experience. I think it lasted several weeks because now we had to find a ceiling flower. We thought we would reference one, and we had to find a real one from a church. We had to find one that would hold up against the very crisp and unforgiving typography or a typeface, which is the one that we used in the MoCA logo. So we took photographs and we started to make traces. We started to put them um, into the logo. These are early works, and I would do drawings, and Aarti would take it and give me her feedback. We would talk about them together, and she would place it into the logo to see if it worked. You see here referencing ratios of architecture as well as putting the flowers in, trying different colors. Um, for example, it's amazing to see the different types of flowers. Like the one on the left has almost Persianate arabesque aesthetics to it compared to the one on the extreme right. And so we would make copies of these and then change the contrasts, highlight different aspects to see what would work. And it was very exciting when I went back to the Margao church after this long hunt. And here is a picture of the front altars of the Margao church on the very important equinox day, which is where the church itself is designed so that the light falls exactly on the three most important statues, including the Holy Spirit, on the day of the Pentecost. Um, or on the day of the equinox, I think. And going back into this church, I started to notice these very interesting halo like patterns on the Christ and the Madonna on the side altars. If you look over here, it's a flower, it's a ceiling flower that almost sits like a ray of light behind a halo of light. And the one in the Jesus, behind the Jesus statue, seemed to bring everything that we were looking for in terms of the aesthetics that we had found in Buddhist temples. We tried to combine this idea of a rosette, which is very important, which is a very please forgive this very poor quality image over here. But I did a trace of that, and it led to this drawing, which we then had to go take through the same process and work in to finally arrive at something that became what became the logo. If you see here, it needed a ring. It needed a ring around it just to make it sit very well with the typeface. Over here, and this is something that Aarti was very insistent on, is she asked me to draw it with my hand and not to do a trace and not to do a vectorization. And if you look on the left, it's a vectorization, which is what a computer, like a computer will take and smoothen the images, versus smoothen all the edges. Versus on the right, it is done by hand, and that means each surface has been accounted for by a human, and so there are little imperfections. And I think when you look at the Baroque of Goa, there is definitely it's very hard for me to explain what I mean, but it's almost like the wood is fighting back against the hand of the carver. It's not smooth granite that can be perfectly, or marble that can be perfectly sculpted into and polished, like in an Italian church, but it's a rough teak wood. And there is, I think, in that kind of imperfection, and it makes you think about what is the speed in which these churches were made. Was it really important that they had to make something that was perfectly smooth, or was it important that the churches become built fast? So there is a story and a history in everything. And so we kept the hand drawing, and then we had to refine the hand drawing so that it worked at different scales. So this is a small part that's very technical, and this is the nitty gritties of graphic design. um, because at the end of the day, you can have a lot of ideas in your head about what you want to reference, but a logo has to be very functional and has to really work, has to be reproducible, has to be screen printable, printed on inkjet, it has to be printed at the size of a postage stamp and even smaller, or it has to be blown up. All of this affects the final drawing. So actually in the brand manual of the MoCA, of the museum, you actually have two options for flowers. When you're printing it really small, you have to use one which has a little bit more white space within the detailing, so that the ink doesn't bleed into it and the petals don't get distorted. So these are, I just wanted to include this so that people understand maybe the technical aspects of graphic design a bit more. Concluding, some of the colors that you see referenced actually come from the altars of the churches: the gold, the white, the black, and the red mud. And I wanted to end this presentation actually with an interesting criticism that we received from Marie Fernanda, who is an incredible veteran historian who works with the Gulbenkian Museum. And she has been actually with MoCA from its inception to right now, and she was very closely involved with the refurbishment of the museum space and the restoration of the objects. And if you look at the MoCA catalog, which many people have, you will know that that is her text actually. So one thing that she said is, why didn't you use uh, a flower motif from the museum collection itself? And I think that was her one uh, uh, critique of the logo. And I think our response to her was that, uh, especially today, like the idea of the museum, we did not want to actually remain within the collection itself. The museum is actually a starting point. At least in the branding project, we saw it as a starting point to outward into Goa and into the very much lived space of these cultural practices. And so it felt very important to to bridge the outside world with the inside world. And therefore, our flower comes from a ceiling of a church and not from within the museum collection itself. Um, and thank you so much.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Nishant. That was very interesting. And what we're going to do now is open the floor to questions. So you can leave your questions
Sure.
in the chats, or like I said, you can also raise your hands. And while people are doing that, we already have two questions for you in the chat box.
Okay.
It's from Clive, and he says, should the museum be archiving its logos over time as it evolves via the website or other means?
Um, I think the museum, I think it's a really important, since the museum itself, its job is archiving. I think it's very important to archive everything. And really, like, this logo was very much created with what we call 21st century concerns in mind. The idea to actually draw the connecting lines outside of the museum to churches that exist in Goa actually was a way to facilitate the idea of people being able to engage and make the connections, so that they understand that what they see in their churches is as important as what you get in a museum. And the museum actually does the same thing. It has walks everywhere, and so it has the church walks that are really popular, and which Clive, you run. And so every logo would have been designed as a response to the actual time and the historical and even socio-political context of that time. And I would say that's 100% true for the logo, the current logo. And even if you don't intend to, the thing about art and design is that the context, social and historical context of a certain time, will be within the work. And so that is a really important history. So I would actually think that graphic design tells so much of the story. If you can look at a newspaper article from like 50 years ago and not only get the information that was there in the article, right? In the same way, it would be kind of important to archive every logo, but not only every logo, but every brochure, every pamphlet. I think that's very important work. It's also so that the institutional memory doesn't remain with the people itself who run it, and that you have to think maybe 50 years from now somebody will be able to access your drive and have all of this material at hand.
We also have Dr. Lewis asking why is the C of MoCA not behaving itself? That is under the M and little higher.
um, that's quite interesting. Actually, I had never thought of that. I don't know if Aarti, who is on this call, would like to answer that. My personal answer would be like, sometimes I think what I didn't mention is that there are so many. Okay, Aarti is online, so I'll let her speak.
Yeah, hi. There is no particular reason for it other than the fact that it works visually. I had actually placed the letter forms in a way that they just formed a lovely form and had beautiful spaces around it. That was entirely based on the aesthetic. But while I'm here, I'd also like to clarify that the quote by me, which you said about
Oh,
typography is language made visible is not by me. I was quoting Ellen Lupton, just to let you know.
oh yes, I knew that
Yeah.
wasn't your quote, but I think I was trying to say that you had.
Yes, I do say that often. True, true.
Actually, if this conversation opened up interesting questions for you that makes you want to explore, especially type and typography more closely, I would really recommend listening to Aarti's talk on typography, which was done as another MoCA History Hour, I think, last year. It's really, really illuminating, and it's often a world that we don't think about, that we need to like think about the context that is carried in the design of just use, but it's tremendous, and its impact on really huge. And so I would really recommend listening.
Yeah, I think Nishant is screen's frozen, but the talk he was talking about happened last year in April, and you can find the link on our YouTube channel now. Um, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question?
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Nishant.
Okay, sorry, there was a bit of a break in signal, so I missed what you said.
I was telling everyone that we have the talk on our YouTube channel that you were talking about.
Yeah.
We have another question from Clive, and he's asking if there was a specific reason for the colors black, white, and gold in the logo.
Um, I think the white and gold very much was again referencing the architecture, the gold that you see and the white of the lime plaster. The black is because, at least my understanding of it is that one, like, actually, to go a little back into the previous question by Dr. Lewis, why is the sea not behaving itself? What I had wanted to say, and I think what it's essentially what Aarti said as well, which is that simply because it worked. I feel like there's one thing which often isn't accounted for when designers, when people like listen to reasons behind something. And so one is the design principles itself at work, and the other is the historical context and the aesthetics that are being referenced. So all of the historical things we talked about. But really, the third thing in making anything is just making it work and taking these creative leaps and working from your gut. And you can only know if it worked retrospectively by doing it first. And I think that's a really, really important part of anything that gets made. And sometimes there isn't a logic, or there isn't a historical reason, or there isn't a good enough reason, except that it worked. And often I think that's actually how aesthetics end up what they are, is that it looked beautiful, and later people understand why over time, why did it look beautiful, or something that didn't look very beautiful several decades later, people think, oh, it's really beautiful. Except it was made in that moment, and because it worked. So coming back to the black, uh, black is just a really strong contrasting color, and it works against white, and that's a requirement of the logo itself. And secondly, that actually the way in which and so when it's printed on white paper or against a white background, you will always see it, and it's just there. Actually, black is almost not there. It's just an empty void, right? So that's why black. And I think, and Clive, especially because you work at the museum, you will know that uh, that is one of the aspects of the logo which is actually interchangeable. So there is a version, there are versions where there are different colored squares behind the logo, but black is sort of the way in which it was launched, an inaugural color, and it's quite important because of that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so we'll be closing the session now. And before I do so, I have a few thank yous to make. First of all, to you, Nishant, of course. The mocha flower is such an important part of the museum's identity, and so much thought and effort has gone into making it. So thank you for taking us back on this journey and letting us know the whole process that was involved in it. And thank you for making the flower, of course, you and Aarti, who's also here today. And also a very big thank you to everyone in the audience who chose to spend your Saturday evening with us, and you made this a very fun and interactive session for Nishant and me. And we hope to see you soon for our next Heritage Hour in the month of April. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Gunjan, and everyone who attended.